The next stage in Western civilization dawns. This is by Russell Clark of the Capital Flows and Assets Market Substack. A lot to take in and think about, but here we are at the collection of thoughts. It always seems clear to me that whoever won, the US deficit was not going to shrink, with the US 30-year Treasury yield spiking back to 4.6%. The market knows this as well. Why investors have continued to be bullish on TLT remains a mystery to me. Shares outstanding in TLT US should really be falling, not rising, but old habits are die hard, I guess, he says. The thing about President Trump getting reelected and likely sweep by the Republicans is that America First is here to stay. In some way, this moves U.S. political practice is closer to U.S. business practice. What I mean by that is that rules are not so important. Leverage and power is. If you want to have an independent policy from the U.S., then you need to have an independent military and supply chain. Only 2 or 3 nations have this: Russia, China, and possibly India. And there are the only nations that can negotiate with the US, mainly as they have an independent military base. The 3 countries that I've mentioned that I have lived in, Australia, Japan, and the UK, and now closer to vassal states than truly independent nations. The UN is also largely redundant. We are back to great power political era. The likely outcome of a Trump win is the rise of strongmen politicians everywhere and the remilitarization of every corner of the globe. The EU needs the European army to remain relevant, but I suspect distrust runs in deep for that to be realistic. Ultimately, the re-election of Trump signals the end of trade and trust-led growth. It ends the era of all getting prosperous together. The market was already foreshadowing this with the dominance of U.S. equities, and this seems likely to continue. The dominant trade of long S&P 500 and short treasuries also looks likely to continue. The depressing thing about all of this is that the countries that bet most heavily of the U.S. remaining a leader in free trade and democracy are likely to lose the most. Europe, that had largely demilitarized after horrors of 2 world wars, will be forced to remilitarize and ponder whether this can be done without conflict. Japan, who has built its economy model around the trade with the US and was the original supporter of buying treasuries instead of gold, is seeing real wages decline and its economy stagnant. I always found gold in yen terms our fascinating chart and continued to sell off points to collapse relative wealth of the Japanese. Japan embraced the treasury over gold trade with gusto, accumulating all of its foreign reserves in U.S. treasuries, while forward thinking at the time it seems to be backward looking now. Now, where does this end? Well, the U.S. pursued a growth through trade policy, and in the hopes that it would export democracy to the rest of the world, while also securing the leading position of the U.S. It's no coincidence that Trump and the Republican Party have changed position when growth through trade looked to be strengthening rivals. The American public has chosen a different path, and U.S. economic dominance in the early 20th century was built upon the destructive wars in Europe and Asia that hobbled rivals, while leaving the U.S. unscathed. America First policies also includes others must-fail policies. The victory of Trump and Republicans also potentially is the next step on moving to a true digital world that is distinct from the nation-state world we live in today. American corporations control almost all the important aspects of the digital world, from optic fiber cables to social media, to operating systems to payment systems. Large U.S. corporations operate on purely global scale, that is, at odds with the domestic focus of nation-state. We have already seen that the nation-state struggles to enforce its will against large US corporations, and with the re-election of Trump, tax rates will likely fall further. Elon Musk has already made the jump from businessman to politician with control over SpaceX and Starlink, making him the most powerful single person in military matters. The support of Bitcoin, which is outside of the control of the US government, also adds to the idea that we are moving to a new stage of Western civilization, or returning to an age of empire with the US tech company, the digital world overlords. This would be similar to the arrangement between the UK government and the East Indies company, the India company back in the day, the Victoria era, Queen Victoria. In the short term, the obvious trades will work. Long S&P 500, gold, Bitcoin, and short treasuries. In the longer term, I would bet on politics in the rest of the world turning more violent. Rule of law and free trade politicians are useless against the Trump administration. I see the return of the general politician globally and the end of the lawyer politician. I think that is a shame, but if the most powerful nation wants it that way, then that's the way it's going to be. And this is by Russell Clark from Capital Flows and Asset Markets on Zero Hedge. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.